Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN. We're a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Connelly Taaffe and Deepa Purushothaman. Thank you for joining us tonight. FAN's YouTube channel has an archive of over 300 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to our channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for our introductions. Connelly Taaffe is a clinical associate professor at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management, where she teaches personal leadership insights and is the director of women's leadership programming. She designs and delivers the Kellogg Women's Leadership Seminar Series, the signature program for female students across Kellogg's full-time, evening and weekend, and executive MBA programs. Ellen also runs a leadership advisory consulting, speaking, and coaching business and is a TEDx speaker. She shares her insights on leadership, careers, and advancing women and inclusion through her writing and speaking in media like Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Business Insider, Washington Post, Bloomberg, and Kellogg Insight. Deepa Purushothaman spent more than 20 years at Deloitte helping clients transform and grow. She was the first Indian American woman and one of the youngest people to make partner in the firm's history. As a senior partner, she was the U.S. managing partner of WIN, Deloitte's renowned women's initiative. Deepa is an author and founder of multiple businesses. In 2022, her debut book, The First, the Few, the Only, was published to international acclaim. She recently founded The Rewrite, an unconventional think tank advancing a new story of work. She is also an executive fellow at Harvard Business School. Let's welcome Ellen Taaffe and Deepa Purushothaman.
Thank you so much, Lonnie. I'm so excited to be here. And Ellen, I can't wait to talk about this book. As we were chatting, we said we could probably have this conversation for 3 or 4 hours because when I picked up the book, there's so many nuggets, so many lessons. So I'm excited to have this discussion with you.
I'm thrilled to be here with you. And thank you, Lonnie, as well.
So let's just jump in, Ellen. One of the things I just want to start with is a little bit about your corporate background, because in addition to all the amazing things you do now to develop our next generation, you also have a long and very senior experience in corporate. So can you tell us a little bit about that, just for context and your voice as you wrote the book?
Sure. So I spent 25 years in corporate America, primarily in consumer packaged goods. I worked for Quaker Oats and part of PepsiCo. They acquired us. So I was there for 2 decades, starting in sales, moved over into brand management. And I held the top brand management post in divisions of Quaker and then under PepsiCo, did a strategy role there. And then I moved across industries, again, kind of in CMO sort of roles for Royal Caribbean and then Whirlpool Corporation. And following that, I joined a company that I had been their client and ran that company for 5 years. It was a brand and product strategy consulting company. I did that for 5 years. At the same time, I joined my first board of directors, my first corporate board. And I now serve on 2 corporate boards and 1 private company board as well. And then I came to Kellogg in 2016, joined the faculty as part of the leadership group, and really found my my final career stage, and that led me to become an author as well.
Yeah, your calling, right? But I also think just the corporate background, the fact that you've been in the seat is also really helpful for people to know as we have this conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so let's start with why did you want to write this book? Tell us the motivation behind it and the reason for it.
Yeah, I throughout my career was building my career and family, and it was really when I got onto my first board, I was the only woman. My second board, I was the only woman, and realized late or woke up late to say that, gosh, we are not advancing like I would have thought that we would have and should have. And then took this role in leadership. And in one of my first new orientations with MBAs, I saw a female CEO share her amazing story, and I looked at the audience asking her questions at the end, and the only people raising their hands were the men in the room. And I know these women are brilliant and amazing and have done a lot with their 20s. So something was up there, and it kind of led me into diving deeper into research and into stories, and realizing that some things were still going on. I thought it would be different with a younger generation, and is not completely. So we have a lot more work to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's in we have very kindred books. You and I have talked about that. And I remember so distinctly interviewing a woman, and she said to me, I'm leaving my corporate career. She was, on the verge of retirement, in a lot of ways, the same way that I entered my corporate career, from a perspective of women. And I think for a lot of us, that's a very hard thing to grapple with, because we want to believe it's getting better and it's changed. And unfortunately, in some ways it hasn't, right? So
yeah, that's how I started my first sales training class. I was the only woman in the room. So it was like, this cannot be the bookends of my career. Was a big part of my motivation.
Yes. So tell us what the mirror door is. Let's just jump right into it. What does that mean? Sure. What are you hoping people learn from that?
Yeah, so the mirror door is my metaphor for this moment that many women face, where when we are facing opportunity and reflect inward and think we're not ready or we're not worthy, and we hold back, in effect, doing a lot of things that have worked before, but not moving forward into something being less than perfect, not having complete certainty. And that's where all the growth lies. And so it's a form of holding back. Now, for sure, we have certainly a lot of obstacles or biases that we also face. But in this case, we might also be locking ourselves in place as well by holding back.
Thank you. Yeah. So one of the things that really struck me from the book is that there's not many books that talk about both the system and the individual, right? I find when I do my own work that we're either trying to fix the woman or we're trying to fix the system, but there's very few places where it's a little bit of both. Can you talk about that? Because I think it's an important distinction. You're not just saying to the women, do more, be more, work harder. That's not your message.
Yeah. And I mean, part of it, there's so much focus on the glass ceiling, and I feel like we can't get anywhere close to that unless we open the mirror door. And I extend the metaphor into the mirrored maze, which is, I think, the workplace where it's so challenging to figure out, to navigate your way. And I will tell my students, I'm not here to fix you, or I'm not here to tell you it's all on your shoulders. I'm trying to help you to understand the world that is, so you can go create the world that we all want, that you for sure want. So it's really important to understand what is happening in the world, what's workplaces that are still sort of embedded with old-fashioned values and things that are still part of the practices, but that there's what do we do in the face of that? So I hope to provide that balance, though I think a lot of this is also things that we could do in the face of that mirrored maze.
And where do you think some of that locking in place, that mirroring, if I can call it that, comes from, right? Because it starts early, and you and I've talked about it starts in childhood.
Yeah, I think that, and this is where there's so much great research on some of the conditioning that we have as children, and almost wherever you are in the world, you socialize as kids with your gender. And there are rules that are actually different between them. And that's what I loved this research that I found out of Georgetown, of that, the girl code of relationships teaches a lot of wonderful things, like, cooperation, building deep relationships, being other-oriented, lots of good things like that. But it also brings things like don't act superior. You might get ostracized from the group. So certain aspects that, look good, be good, smile, keep the peace, don't rock the boat, make sure you're not a bother, you look good, you're perfect, like all these things that we then can take with us. And boys so often are socialized in a different way that is, instead of competitive, it's a bit more, instead of cooperative, it's more competitive. It's more one-upmanship. And I think I don't have sons, but I have daughters, but I think that must be hard for a little guy. But it also teaches them to figure things out, to move into action before they are certain. Whereas girls so often are really taught, be certain, manage your risks, just even in how we parent in ways that keep girls a bit safer. We give them a safer message. And that helps us in a lot of ways, but it also might hold us back from taking risks or moving into action when things look uncertain. Boys learn to figure it out.
Yeah.
So, like even phrases like, fake it till you make it. Boys really learn to do that when they're kind of taunted to do something more. For girls, that kind of seems like icky and, not the right thing to do.
So I feel like what you're saying a little bit is like that hesitation is almost taught to us and starts to take root really early of being more cautious. And yes, I mean, even in my own research, right? The grateful, don't rock the boat, be thankful, be appreciative, right? But
what others think matter. I mean, both the other orientation has a good thing of caring, but it also has a, care a lot about approval and acceptance in ways that make us not want to take too much of a risk.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories in your book is the nail story. It really jumps out at me. Can you tell, because it's a story from your childhood, and I think it's a great example of even when you follow the rules or those rules you're talking about, the gendered sort of norms that a lot of us are taught or were taught, even though I want to believe that's changing. Just share that little bit of that story with us.
Sure. So it's a story of when I was a tween. I had usually played basketball with my brothers and neighbors and dad in the driveway. We grew up in South Florida. And I had gotten a signal earlier that day in our house that, oh, we're going to play basketball. And I said, I want to play. And then when that time came, I went outside, I'm ready to play, and was told, no, you can't play today. We have the teams already picked. We have even numbers. You can't play. And earlier that day, I mean, I was just sort of stung by this because earlier that day, I heard the same plan to play basketball and bring people over. And I was told, your nails are too long. You scratch someone. And I went in and cut off my nails. So after being told that I couldn't play, I followed the rules. I did what I thought, and came in and, my eyes were stinging and, looked down to see nails in the trash basket, and just was like, I think it was kind of this early lesson now when I look back that, you can play by the rules and it doesn't always work out. And also wonderful, great people, our heroes can also let us down. And that's how I feel about my family and all that. I didn't even want to tell this story. And one of my sisters said, "You're going to tell the nail story, right?"
Yeah. And it really stands out to me because
telling it.
Yeah, no. And so much of what you're talking about is, and you can feel the emotion as you're talking about, because it was you said like it was such a big deal to you that you had grown them. But I think it's also just this reminder, because I know so many women who will try and contort and conform to the cultures and the workplaces around them and follow the rules and, behave in ways that are inauthentic, and it still doesn't work out for them. And so it's almost this double whammy in that situation. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think I did a lot of that. I think it's a lot less so now, but it's that instinct. I think when you're not the majority, well, I have to do more of that. Now, fortunately, we're not wearing the kind of suits and things like that I was wearing years and years ago, that, was really kind of fitting into a real masculine dress norm. But even back in the day, I was told not to wear red. That was the wrong way to stand out. So of course I wear a lot of red. And I've noticed every picture that Anne Marie and Lonnie showed.
Yes, I saw that.
I do that a lot in my book events.
You talk a little bit about also the rules and kind of continuing this conversation, the rules that women struggle with in the workplace. And, for me, a lot of that is about permission and perfection, but you talk about them in regards to preparing for perfection, eager to please, fitting the mold, working pedal to the metal, and patiently performing and awaiting to be noticed. To me, it was like this very heavy hitting, yes, I know so many women that do all of those things. They may not even realize that they do it. So can you talk a little bit more about those barriers and how they affect the mirror door?
Yeah, well, we do it because it works for us and we're rewarded. And, so I call them my 5 success strategies that can become perilous. And, so they bring a lot of good things, but they can, unbeknownst to us, they could sideline us and add a lot of, personal issues too. So, for example, preparing to perfection, that's all about delivering excellence.
Yeah.
And, that enables us to become like the go-to people. Wouldn't you want someone, a perfectionist on your team in some ways? But what happens is that it takes a ton of preparation to be that perfect person. And that adds a lot of stress. And as our plates grow and as we ascend in the workplace, the expectation, we don't have as much time. And the expectation is you got to decide faster. You have to take more risks, knowing that all that preparation probably enables you to make more decisions. But we get really used to the preparation and being perfectionist and hold back. So, it's not only stressful, but we also can get tagged more as the worker bee versus the leader, which is a real shocker for someone with an identity of achievement and excellence and all of that. So it's really important for us to ask for help, to prioritize our effort, to know when is a draft enough, to understand the risk and expectations, and realize that we're more ready probably to take risks and decide as well. The next one is eagerly pleasing, and that's really about relationships. And these are people who are so strong at team building and being part of a team. They're like the glue that holds the team together. But over time, we can neglect our needs, or we could hold back our opinion. And that's where the perceptual risk with that is, can this person handle conflict? Can they make the tough decisions that not everyone's going to be happy about? So, the real solution here is to tap into the care and other orientation we have, to trust our relationships, to confront what needs to be said, to set boundaries. And it takes practice. It takes, a lot of courage to do this, because we're worried that, someone will be mad at us or we'll lose the relationship. I suppose I should continue with this. So fitting the mold, sort of talked about it, where it really makes someone hit the ground running. They're very agile, gives agility. What's said about them is, oh, they fit right in and you feel like you belong, but that might be on the surface. And so you might be not feeling as authentic as you really are, or really sharing who you are. And that can seed doubt. We can think, did they hire the real me? Or if I start to show the real me, is that going to work? Because I showed this person who I think I should be. And in many cases, this is a situation where women have to decide, am I up for being a more pioneering person, or being that person who stands out possibly in good or bad ways? Am I up for that? And is the mold in this organization expanding? Is it rigid? Can I change it? And so this is a real personal decision based on what you see in the workplace as well. And the next one is pushing pedal to the metal. And this is the high endurance, results oriented, kind of the taskmaster. And the risks here are their own personal burnout. they miss the connection to themselves, but also sometimes they risk creating followership. So as leaders, we need to have followers too. And if we don't stop, pause, and create connection with our teams, share our why for why we're so, gunning to get this project done or all of that, we can lose people. And so this is also the one that faces a bias of where's all that warmth that I expect from women? Because this is the highly competent, just driven person that is stereotypically and historically been seen as more of, something that men do more. And so we really need to pause to connect to ourselves. And the last one is patiently performing. This is me early in my career in the sense of, head down, not being a bother to the boss, not being the squeaky wheel, and missing that the squeaky wheel gets the grease a lot of the time. And, a lot of times it's associated with feeling like if I promote myself, that's just not the way, like I was taught, don't be a braggart. And that gave me humility, but it also, made me not be able to, self-promote. And what happens when we don't do that is other people could think you're not as ambitious as you might really be because you have a rule against doing that. So we really have to reframe self-promotion to be just how it works and more career planning, and collaboration. And our bosses are responsible for us to be able to, our bosses are responsible to be able to advocate for us, to understand what we've accomplished and what we want. And so we just have to be aware that these things that we're rewarded for and drive success can also be sideliners, both from a perception, but also personally with what they bring up for us. I'm going to take a breath now.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think for me, as I read that in the book, and even as you're talking about it now, what's so interesting is we don't talk enough about how some of the things we do when we start our career are not necessarily the same things that are valuable to us later in our career. We don't talk about how that changes. And I personally think that's more so for women, in kind of what you have to flex and what you don't flex. And so much of what you're describing and why it tied to that cultural question is we are taught, especially these 5 things, right? Be perfect, please, fit the mold, work hard, overperform. And yet, if you do those things, especially as you get more senior, it can, to your point, can be like this double-edged sword on if that's actually going to be make you be seen as a leader. And so there's a nuance to that conversation I found really interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's also where managers can help guide us too, can help look for these things, and help show how expectations are rising as we rise too. So often women don't have those senior people in their lives that have experienced that evolution of their own identity and their own behavior and realize they're more ready than they think. So
absolutely. I mean, I feel like so many of the women that reach out are just looking for those mentors, right? Because there's so few and far between. I think that's a real issue. And it's so interesting to me. Your first one in particular, preparing for perfection, reminds me of one of my mentors, Barbara. She sits on public boards. So we're talking about someone who is very senior and very visible, but she over prepares even as on the boards because she's the only woman. And so she, even at such a senior level of, beyond her corporate career, is now sitting on these, Fortune 50 boards. And she will stay up all night, she said, for the 2 nights before a board meeting and take notes and come in with reams because she feels like as the only woman, she has to be, beyond reproach. And so I'm just sharing that because I think it's interesting that even when you arrive, you can still struggle with these things. And so it's.
I believe it because I think that especially when you're, as you would say, the first, the few, or the only, I think you're under the microscope and you don't want to let other women down, but you also don't want to have other people, somehow validate perhaps a stereotype that's negative as well. So it doesn't end. That's what's been so interesting. It's really relevant throughout our careers.
Yeah. And it's important to understand them so you know, to your point, how to address them when they show up and know which ones work for you. Because maybe, maybe number 3 is still something that works in the culture that you're in, but you don't want to do 1 and 2 anymore. Right. And so
Yeah.
it's constantly this evolution or this dialogue that you have to have. Ellen, for me, like there was also this running parallel in the book around the need for feedback, or that you got a lot of feedback, or women tend to get a lot of feedback, and in all candor, not all of it is very helpful to us. And so there's like this self-perception that you have with the mirror door. There's also a lot of outside feedback. So can you talk a little bit more about some of the feedback you got in your career? And did you always take it in, or how do you figure out what to accept and what to give back, is the language that I use?
Yeah, I love that point of feedback is not something we always have to take.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that feedback ends up, it's really also from the view of the person giving it to you. And so there's always inherent, it's about them as well, or something that they know, or a group that they're a part of. And I think the feedback that I share in the book that you might be getting at is
the Chuck feedback.
The Chuck feedback.
Yes.
First of all, Chuck, favorite. I mean, in case there's another boss on here, he's amazing. I wouldn't have the career I have without Chuck. But he very slowly, through a couple different meetings, eventually told me they think you're not tough enough. But it started with, a term, you need to show more stand-up leadership skills. And I was trying to figure out what that was. You need more presence. And eventually, I think given our close relationship and because I wasn't getting what he meant, he did say, they think you're not tough enough. And I think part of that, I was, I think, kind of angry at first to hear that, especially, and I know from the research, women get more subjective feedback and more vague feedback. So,
or we don't get feedback at all.
Yeah, or no feedback. Yeah. So it's so important to really learn how to get it and gain from it. And in my case, my initial reaction was like, are you kidding me? Like, I have made these tough calls, tough decisions. And I knew he had seen that. And eventually he revealed that it was really the senior team who was evaluating who becomes VP. Now, at the time, I had the same scope of business as other VPs. And so I felt like I was in that situation where I have to prove myself in the job, whereas some peers got the job, got the title based on their potential. But, as we talked through it, it really became, once I had a little bit of time to process it and we talked more, there were times where I would go into senior leadership meetings and I was way too quiet. I wasn't really showing a strong point of view that I showed in my normal job. And I really learned that, senior leaders, the CEO, he's got a snapshot from, once a quarter when he would see me at a certain presentation, or, you'd once a year present your strategic plan or your operating plan, whatever that is. And so understanding that people take notes and they're looking for, they take notice, I should say, and they're looking for, is this person, can I see them as a leader? And I think that women very easily can get tagged as the nice one. And I think I did. And I had to work through, with Chuck's collaboration, to be really positioned. He first said, we really need to showcase you better. And I hated that term, showcase me,
Yeah.
but that's really what we had to do. I had to showcase myself. And I think for me, it's been a long-term habit of going into new situations or where people are above me, more senior, and being a bit more of an observer than jumping into the conversation and share my opinions. And I don't want to be someone who doesn't show myself. And so that was an important thing to do. And it eventually happened.
Well, and I also think there's so much to that. And I want to come to men later in our conversation, but I
Yes.
just think it's like for anybody listening, it's great. I mean, I love what Chuck did because not everybody will give you that feedback as we
Oh,
were just
yeah.
talking about. And especially if it's uncomfortable,
So
men
thank
tend to not give that feedback to women, especially women of color, if it's any way something that's difficult, confusing, confrontational. And so we don't get the feedback, like you said. But so much of what you also talk about in that same chapter is that you need to know what the book is on you, meaning, right? And you can say this better than I will because it's your words, but basically you're saying you need to know what people think about you. I mean, you don't have to take that in, but if you don't know that they think you're being too quiet, you can't fix it.
Yeah, yeah. So this idea of know the book on you,
Yeah.
there's not literally a book, but this idea of, not just those close in around you who you might show more of yourself, but what's said about you when you're not in the room. And that's where sponsors are so important. Women are over mentored and under sponsored. And Chuck really was my sponsor and he fought for me. But I think, how difficult to not have achieved that. And then how do I tell the person? And I worry that that's even worse these days because there's a lot of worry about, not only I don't want to hurt this person or be perceived as mean, but I don't want to get a bad reputation of whatever I tell this person. So I'm so thankful for Chuck.
Yeah.
But
also knowing, right, what people think about you. And
yeah.
we don't get that enough. I remember when I was early in my career, there was a program where I was in a development program and they ended up going 2 levels above wherever we were and getting feedback from, you had to pick 3 people who might be in your possible network 5 years from now, right? And they sat down with those leaders and asked them, what do you think of Deepa? And that leader may not have ever met me, but it was reputational. Yeah. And we got to, dissect, is that important feedback to have? But I think it's so important and not something that we talk about enough. Like your reputation matters, right? And it's harder to manage your reputation if you don't even know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when we get feedback that we don't understand, getting really good with questions, like, if I had stand-up leadership skills, what would that mean? Or
what would that look like? Yeah.
Enough,
yeah.
What would that look like in a meeting with the CEO?
Yeah.
To really just try to understand a lot more. So, so feedback, getting good at it, all the way around, secret weapon, I think, for leaders, and we need to not be so secret.
Yeah, absolutely, for women especially.
Yeah.
One of the favorite chapters in the book is the mirrored maze, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, but it's really talking about, yes, you can have your own mirrored door and the things you have to work through for yourself, but you're still in this larger company, culture, situation. So can you talk a little bit about the mirrored maze and how you navigate that on top of the mirrored door?
Yeah. So the mirrored maze is just this idea. There was Alice Eagley is a Northwestern professor. She and another professor did research and referred to a woman's career as a labyrinth, walking through the labyrinth. And it kind of started with that. I feel like it's a maze that's mirrored because things happen and we keep bumping into a wall almost and reflect inward and think it's me. And it could be things like feedback, but it could be just understanding how do things work around here. And so sometimes there's, the policies, the how, what gets rewarded haven't caught up from decades ago relative to the demographics of what people want and who is an employee now. And so often, if we did not have someone above us in our family or someone senior to us that we know or mentored us, we don't know what the rules are. Yeah. And not having that, or whether it's somebody who's first generation or did not have a working mom or had no sort of senior mentor, you don't automatically know. And so often people are not clued in. I mean, so for any manager out there, how do you help your people understand how do promotions work? What gets rewarded? What does success look like? What do you have to watch out for as well. And that's, I feel like people who are not in the majority tend to, it's like a maze, and we too often reflect inward that it's on us, and it's about the workplace.
Yeah.
Much of, if not most of the time. And we have to change things there.
Yeah.
But we have to navigate what we have right now so we can go change it.
I think that's part of the magic of the book, is that I think for a lot of us, we know some of these things, but they're not necessarily conversations that are had openly. And because you have story, and then you also have research, and then you're also telling your own stories, it's much more accessible, right? It's more real. You were in the seat. But I also think there's something about it, and I'm going to go way back to the beginning of, why you wrote this book, but you open the book even with this story about, are you that professor? Because I also think part of what is special, Ellen, about the work that you do and the way you're talking about it is that, most people, when they get to the seat, and I've had this conversation myself, they don't want to talk about the challenges they had, right? They just want to talk about the rise. And part of why I think the challenge we have with first views and onlys is because we don't have enough stories. We don't have enough people talking about how hard it is. We just talk about, yay, there's a woman in the seat, but she doesn't talk enough about the challenges getting there because there's no reward for that. So I just want you to share the opening story from the book, but also just reflect on how you came to share so much of your story in this way.
Yeah, sometimes I think I'm crazy to do this, but yeah, so the opening story is where a student came in on the first day of class. I teach a class called Personal Leadership Insights. And she came in and said, you're that professor who doubts herself, right? And, I just was like, oh, that's not the reputation I want to have. But I had written a story, I think it's called something like 3 Tips to Manage Self-Doubt in Kellogg Insight, which is a newsletter that we have. And this is back in, I think, 2021. And it got picked up by Entrepreneur Magazine, Trade, a lot of trade organizations. There must be a lot of doubt that goes through trade organizations, Business Insider, and then LinkedIn picked it as editor, or a LinkedIn editor pick of the week. And I started getting emails from people I didn't know, men and women, pretty senior levels, emailing me about, they feel doubt. I feel doubt every single day from a CEO. And so I think like word was out. And even I had on one of my boards, somebody shared it with the other board members. And even though it was out there, I just was like, oh, but I didn't think they would see it. And but it led to, even in that board, the next time we were all together, so many rich discussions. I still have a number of peers on the board who will talk to me about their daughters or their wife or their own doubt. And it just sort of made me feel like we aren't talking about it. And I had this wonderful opportunity through Northwestern to do a fellowship with the Op-Ed Project, which is about writing op-eds from people who are not the majority of people who are writing op-eds. And they taught us how to bravely try to figure out what your point of view was and put it out there. And Katie Orenstein, who was the head of it, she had this quote, and I hope I can remember it, but it's something like, when you speak your mind, there might be consequences. The alternative is to be inconsequential. And I wish I had the quote. I don't know if I got it exactly right, but this idea of, I'm late in my career. I have all this chance to help young leaders build their careers and lives and impact other places. I have my own 2 daughters who are, beginning their work careers. I don't want to be inconsequential. Like, I have this moment where I can do this. And somehow late in I don't think I ever would have shared these things early on. But this idea of things haven't changed enough. and there's too much this hesitating and doubting themselves when they're so ready.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping I can make a difference with this book and with writing and talking and speaking and coaching and all those things.
Absolutely. Well, and I also, just to be fair, we should have started this. We don't know each other that well. We've had a few conversations. We're in a group together, so we know of each other, but we haven't had many hours of conversation. And I think part of what you're describing to me, and even the first time I met you, you were so open and sharing your own stories and trajectory, is that I think we've been taught leadership looks a certain way, right? And leadership is stoic and knows it all. And I call it heroic, right? It's a very particular archetype. And I think what you demonstrated with that piece and what we're talking about in some of this book is it's not like that for most of us. Most of us are full of self-doubt. Most of us are unsure. But again, back to culture and what we were taught when we were kids, like that we're not allowed to show that if you're a leader or if you're running a 1,000, 10,000 person organization. And so there's this dissonance for a lot of us when we're sitting in those seats, because we have huge imposter syndrome or we have huge insecurities, but it feels like we shouldn't. And so I think to me, that's what the article really, may speak to, or how, your perspective on it. And I think more of us want to see leadership in the way that you're talking about it, because that's real. That's how most of us are.
Yeah. And I think in many ways, there's so much, awfulness in the pandemic, but one of the bright lights was showing the human side of people at work and saying like, oh, do you play the guitar? Or, like the kinds of, we're more than just what we were in the workplace. And so more empathy and caring and being like who we really are. I think there's a little backslide on that now, but there's that really changed things too. When I sign my books, I say take care and take charge, and I feel like the take care is the stereotypically historic thing that women bring, and the take charge is the masculine stereotype. And we need leaders who do both. And that's what people want to work for. We need the take charge, especially if we're in a crisis or something like that. But we need to take care. And for too long, the workplaces didn't really have that. So I think those are going to be the best leaders. And that's a good thing, regardless of gender.
Yeah, absolutely. I call that modern leadership. But yeah, I think we're in a moment where we need that, and the world needs that, given everything we're facing and this moment that we're in. So yeah, I think that's a great way to see it. We have, a little bit of time left, but I want to kind of jump into men, because we've talked all about women, and I'm sure there's some men on the call. What does the mirror door mean for men, and what do you want them to take, when they read this book?
Well, I hope that they learn a lot about what many women might be facing or might feel. I think men have their own mirror door too. And I think it might be different success strategies, but I know from, my class is they're men in my class, and I coach my students too. So I know that there are lots of men who are perfectionists or feel like they're pleasers. And that is against some of especially for men, that's a hard thing relative to the man up culture and things like that. So I think they face their own issues, and maybe that's a future book. There's more and more books coming out about that. And so, in so many ways, the social construct has really changed. And I think men are trying to find their way too. And so I also think if men that read this are in a management or a leadership position, there are a lot of things they can do to help recognize potential and voice that. It's fascinating, some of the research that most of the women who are CEOs didn't know they were CEO material until they were told by someone else. So there's such an opportunity for all of us who are managers and leaders to be able to help others see their potential, help them understand the expectations in the organization. There's so much we can even do, basic stuff in meetings, to have more voices be heard. and help to pull those voices out so that people have that, more people are able to influence the workplace decisions and things like that. So I think most men are our allies. I think they don't know what to do and don't want to do anything wrong. And I would just say, tap into your courage to say, I don't know what to do, but I care. How can I help too?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I want to believe that most people in the workplace want to do better, but they don't necessarily know how to do better, right?
Yeah.
And I think what you're talking about is really how men can, I think you call it in the book, keep the mirror door open for women, or help them get through the door themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Be a door opener.
Yeah.
Not a bouncer.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about just the reaction to the book. What has surprised you the most?
Well, coming off of the discussion with men, I actually have had a lot of men read it. And the ones that I know will say, you're so vulnerable, kind of in shock, but I hear a lot of, I'm giving this to my daughters or my nieces, and I wish I had this 20 years ago. And then I also hear that this is relevant for me now. So there's sort of a range of ages that I think it resonates with. I honestly, when someone says, "Oh, that really resonated," I almost want to say, "Oh, that's great," as an author, but like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." In a way too.
Yeah, I'm sorry it's still that way. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that there's a lot of optimism that it's very moving to hear from people. I read this and I'm trying the frameworks. I'm trying some new things in small steps, and it's making a difference. I mean, that's so cool, from strangers that I don't know.
Absolutely. That's the fun of being an author. You get lots of feedback. Yes.
Yeah. So that's really, and I'm sure you experienced that with your book too. I mean, that was me being so wild, like, Deepa, would you do this?
Yeah. No, it's you get a lot of feedback. Not all of it good, but yes, you get a lot of feedback.
Yeah.
And it's fun to see what lands for people, right? And I think you and I chit-chatted about that a little bit. You were excited to hear what landed for me. One of the most profound stories in the book for me was Sue. So maybe as we kind of get close to the end of our time together, but just can you share Sue's story for people who need a little bit of inspiration?
Yeah. So this is a story of when I was pregnant. So it would be a little more than 25 years ago. And really trying to figure out how can I do this? How am I able to? I want this job, and I want to be a great mom, and pretty stressed out about this. And Sue came to visit a mentoring circle that I was in, and talked about her career, and she was highly regarded, just amazing, like president or CEO of her division. And really kind of had almost like a badass persona to her, which I always, like, I admired. It wasn't me, but I admired her. And when I asked her a question of like, how have you done this with 2 kids? And she said, my memory is that she said, I'm bullish enough to think that 80% of me is better than 100% of some of these other people. And at the time, I thought, I never say bullish, but there was something about that I think for a lot of us that feel like we have to work twice as hard, or we're over prepared, like your friend in the board meeting, that maybe 80% can be pretty effective too, and be really strong. And so I here I am. I think about that 25 plus years later. So it was very moving. So it's just kind of amazing that's why the more we tell our stories, it's really amazing how it can inspire people that we don't even know.
Yeah.
So
I love that
thank the
story.
other
I just
person,
feel,
I think.
yeah. I
Yeah.
love that story because I feel like, so many moms in particular who I think are struggling with how to make it all work and questioning, am I giving enough anywhere, right? Or
Yeah.
just women I know who feel like they're not good enough, which is such a profound, pervasive issue for the women I work with. I just think if they could remember that 80% of them is better than 100% of the most of the people around them, the world would be a different place. The workplace would be a different place.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah. So one of the quotes, and I want to give you the last say on this, but one of the quotes in the book that I love, and it's a very simple one. It says, "Courage is the prerequisite to confidence." And I loved that. I just want to kind of give you a few minutes to maybe share your final thoughts on that
Yeah.
and what you want people to take.
Um, so with that, I think in a world where we're always searching for confidence, that's the outcome of taking action. And it takes courage, which chances are everyone on here has a lot of courage. And you can list the things in your life that you did that were courageous. And that's what it takes to move into action. So courage comes first. Confidence is down the road. Courage is the prerequisite. And courage and realizing we're more ready than we realize to take action. And that's what we really should be doing. So that's my hope. That's my hope of the book.
Yeah. No, I love that because I feel like we don't often try because we're waiting for someone else who might be better, have more qualifications. It's back to the Sue story, but yeah, not most of us don't have the confidence that people think that we have, but we also don't want to fake it till we make it. But I like this idea that confidence, right? Just courage, right, is more important. And so just try.
Yeah. It's moving forward in the face of some fear, but with courage. And it's, we have so many, every women's conference has an agenda item of confidence.
Yes.
And we need more of them to be talking about courage and to tap in what I think we already have in a big way.
Yeah. Do you find that that's different for your students? Do you feel like the next generation is more courageous or more confident?
Oh, I think that I preach the same thing about courage, but I think they're in a search for confidence. I think they're more ready and they will change the world. But at the same time, I think they face this in social media. Curated social media does not help.
Yeah.
And so it's really important that we run our own race, figure out who we are, and be the best we can be. And I'm just so impressed with the young leaders that I get to work with, and regardless of gender, it's pretty exciting to see what I think will come, and I think they'll change the world too.
Yeah, and I think this book is a great asset or a great way, great guide for them as they're embarking on that. Again, because the stories and the vulnerability that they can get there. They may not have it now, but that there is a path to get there, I think is the message that a lot of them need to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope to get the word out. Thank you, Lonnie. Thank you, Deepa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen and Deepa, for such a great conversation filled with lots of takeaways for everyone watching across all ages. I know that we have some younger folks watching as well tonight, which I'm sure is, you probably find that pretty gratifying, Ellen, as well. So Deepa, thank you, first of all, for such great, careful preparation for tonight. We really appreciate it. I can't wait to learn more about your book as well. I think there's a lot of topics that you hit in there, and perhaps someday we'll be able to welcome you back. That would be lovely. I want to remind folks that Ellen will be doing an after hours segment with us after the conclusion of this webinar. We'll be starting it at 8:05 p.m. Central, which is in about 11 minutes, give or take. The way that you get to come to after hours is by buying a copy of Ellen's book from our bookseller, The Bookstall. We've been putting the links in chat. So you buy the book, and then in the email receipt that you get from the bookstall, you'll see the link to register for after hours. So come hang out, come bring your own questions, your quandaries, your suggestions, your experiences. Come share them with Ellen. I know that she's all ears. Would love to hear from readers or from people who will be readers in the next few weeks. So come join us and feel free to bring your own questions about this obviously very important topic. There were a couple questions, actually a question that was posted during the event, which I will flip to right now, which will be good. And then I have one more if we have time. We're at 7:56. So Julie is asking, what are some tactics you have seen used to elevate more voices that might not traditionally be heard? I think it's riffing off of something you said about 10 minutes ago.
Oh, yeah. Publish the agenda ahead of time so people can think about what's on there. And I think it's great to reach out to people ahead of time and say, you know, on this topic, I'd really love to hear your opinion. It's really different going from you need to speak up more to I'm dying to know what you think about this project. So it's a little bit of pre-planning ahead of time. And then if you're facilitating the meeting, really working on how do you thank you so much. Let me hear from someone I haven't heard from yet. So making sure you have those points. And lastly, when someone says something that's taken elsewhere or that's forgotten, going back to, I'm really interested in what Deepa said. Can we go back to that? It's really important.
I remember we had the pleasure of hosting Brene Brown 3 different times over the years. And at one point when I was backstage with her and we were talking about just how you get people involved in conversations, in meetings, especially people who might have their temperament or their personality might be a little bit more reserved, that they're not the one who just wants to like drive the conversation nonstop. And that how do you make sure that you, as the person in charge, how do you make sure that you are getting the benefit of all the voices and not just the ones who might be practiced and skilled at domination in a conversation? Because it is a skill from a lot of courageous practice of that confidence. And so what she was saying is that sometimes with her staff, and she had a fairly big staff at that point, that what she would do is she would have around a table that there would be she would pose the question and she would ask everyone to just pause, and everyone knew to always bring paper with them, and that she would first have everyone jot down some thoughts and some answers and to take some time. It's also not about like, okay, you have 30 seconds because not everyone, sometimes you have your answer in 30 seconds, sometimes you don't, right? And so she would wait a little bit of time and then ask people to share. And it's a way of letting people gather thoughts, letting people feel like they're putting it together. For those who might, appropriately for our topic tomorrow night, for people who feel like, oh, I really kind of freeze up if I'm put on the spot and asked to just, somebody calls on me, like, I get like this, that is a way of making sure. And that then she will also collect sometimes those pieces of paper so that even for those who might not feel comfortable even then, that that they can be acknowledged and heard, which I thought was kind of clever in a lot of ways. So
I love that.
Yeah. Great
was
ideas.
good. Right, we're at 8 o'clock. I want to thank Ellen again. Thank you so much. I can't wait to start after hours in about 5 minutes. Deepa, pleasure getting to know you. And we hope to welcome you back again to FAN sometime soon. And for those of you tuning in, thanks for joining us. We hope to see you again at more programs this month.